Have you seen these videos online, maybe YouTube, or someone posted one to my Facebook page of a kid who is opening up a birthday present, and clearly he is anticipating something. You can just tell by the look on his face. There's an expression of anticipation, excitement, joy. His eyes are wide as he just rips the wrapping paper to shreds. But then the look of excitement changes to a look of confusion as he sees the box. In this case, he was hoping for an Xbox, but he's now staring at a box that has a picture of a pottery wheel on the front, and it says, "Make pottery at home, fun for the whole family." And so there's this look of confusion. How could this happen? Did my mom and dad not understand what I told them? I thought I made myself clear. What have I done to deserve this? Have I not done enough for them by existing and everything? And so he's just got this confused look, but then it goes to hurt. Why me? Of all the kids, I'm the one who asks for the Xbox but gets the pottery wheel. And then the look of her turns to this look of anger that his parents would dare wrap this box up for him. And so the video ends with him throwing it across the room and yelling at mom and dad and stomping out of the room and slamming doors. And as adults, we've kind of learned to deal a little bit better with disappointment. But I think most of us can understand the feeling of the kid, right? I mean, we know what it's like to expect one thing and get something else, to have some hope in one area of life, but then to discover that it's really just disillusionment. Now, when it comes to presents, we get better at disguising it. We get better at masking it. Most of you who are married, you know what it's like to have a spouse that just somehow doesn't get it, right? Like you've told your husband, these are the shoes I want, and these are the size of shoes that I wear. This is what I want. And he wants to be creative. He wants to think outside of the shoebox. And so you open up that present on your birthday, and it looks like the right size and the right shape, but you open it up, and it's not a shoes, it's like a box of Nutrisystem food or something like that. It's the worst possible thing he could have gotten you. Or husbands, you want the new iPhone, and just speaking hypothetically, and instead of getting the iPhone, you open up this box, it's the right shape and size, but it's nose hair clippers, because apparently that's sometimes the way life works. You don't get what you want, you get what you need. And we know what it's like to have those moments. Now, we've learned to kind of swallow the bitterness. We've learned to kind of pretend that everything's okay, but inside we can find ourselves slamming doors and stomping out. And I just wonder if some of you have experienced this moment in life, maybe recently. You graduate from college, you're getting ready to graduate, and when you started school, there's lots of hope. There was this look and expression of excitement, but now you don't have anything lined up, and you don't know what you're going to do. It looks like you're going to have to move back in with your parents, and it's not what they want, but it's not what you want either, right? I mean, this isn't the plan. And you've opened up the wrapping paper, and the box isn't what you thought it would be. Or you get married, and there's a lot of excitement and anticipation and joy on that wedding day, but you unwrap, and it takes a while to get some of that wrapping paper off, but you get the wrapping paper off, and it's not what you thought it was going to be, and you're trying to deal with the disillusionment and disappointment. I just know that many of us in our stories could tell of some situations, some scenarios where we open up the present, and we thought we were getting one thing, and what we got was something else. So this is the situation as we read through the book of Ruth. It's chapter 9 in the story, and if there was a video camera rolling in the story, you would see a lot of different expressions. There would be an expression of joy, and there would be an expression of disappointment, and there would be the expression of anger. And their story in many ways just reflects any life story if it's lived long enough. Now, as you read through this book, a question that you should ask yourself is, why is it even in here? It just doesn't seem to be a book of the Bible. It doesn't read like a book of the Bible. It doesn't seem to match the genre. This comes during the time of Judges, but this is not about a judge. It doesn't seemingly appear to be about even the nation of Israel, so why is it even in here? I mean, at first glance, you read the story, and it seems like what you've got is just a story of a family that is of no importance, especially, no prominence or special significance. They just go through a lot of difficult times. So why is the book of Ruth even in the Bible? It's a question to consider. It's a story about a husband named Elimelech and his wife named Naomi. We don't have a picture of Naomi, but we know what her name means. It means pleasant, or it means sweet. And it seems to capture her life early on. In fact, later in the book, she describes her life as full, as just being satisfied. And I'm sure that's how it felt on her wedding day as she and her husband stand and they commit their lives to one another. There's a look of excitement and anticipation. And then things seem to be going according to plan for her story. 2 sons are born. But then when we pick up in her story, the expression has changed and there's a lot of confusion because there's been a famine now in the land for some time, a famine that's so severe that they can no longer stay where they are. I think it's hard for us to imagine a famine like what they experienced, but I'd like us to try and personalize this just a bit. So, imagine that your husband comes home from work, and you can tell it's not been a good day, but there's something more here. You try to talk to him about it, he doesn't want to talk about it. He just kind of sits in silence. He turns on the TV, but he's not really watching it. And then finally that night, as you lay in bed in the darkness, he says, "They let me go at work today." And you say all the right things to him, and you say, "Well, it's going to get better. This won't last. Things will turn around." But they don't. They don't. And 6 months later, you've depleted most of your savings. You've sold your car. You've moved out of your house and into an apartment. 2 years pass. And now it's not just affecting your family, but the whole region. Everyone seems to be impacted by this. And your biggest concern is just what you're going to eat for the next meal. You ever known that kind of hunger? And you think about what you used to think about and think, I can't believe I used to think about those things. I can't believe I used to think about my retirement or my portfolio or my wardrobe or what I was going to wear the next day, because now all you can really think about is, what are my boys going to eat? And you go up to their rooms at night and you kneel beside their bed, and their growling stomachs makes it very hard to hear their nightly prayers. Things have just become desperate. And finally your husband says, we can't stay here. We're going to have to move. We got to try something different, or we're not going to survive this. This is what happens to Naomi and her husband. They have to move. They have to go somewhere, try something. They don't have food to eat. And so they go to this land called Moab. You think, well, okay, it's not really that far if you look at it on a map. They're moving. Time for a fresh start. That happens. People do that. Well, you have to understand what it was like for them. The promised land was part of who they were. It's part of their identity. Each family had a piece of land designated to them in the promised land that would be passed on from generation to generation. And you don't just leave your piece of land. It's part of who they were. And it must have been absolutely desperate for them to pack up and leave. And they go to Moab. Now, Moab, these are the descendants of Sodom. It's a very pagan culture. And what you have in Moab is a lot of prejudice towards the Israelites. These are the sworn enemies of God. And so they go to this very hostile country because they just need food to eat. And they've heard that the ground is more fertile in Moab, and so that's where they go. And I think as they leave that Naomi thinks, well, you know, I've lost everything, and we're losing our home and our land, but I've got my husband. And he's a good man, and he takes care of us. And I've got my 2 boys, and they're healthy, and they're strong, and I've got my God, I've got my faith. And you know what? If I've got that, I'm okay. She even says later in the book that when she left her town for Moab, she left feeling full. But they get to Moab, and her husband gets sick, and he doesn't get better. He becomes weaker and weaker, and eventually her husband dies. And here she is, a single mom, a widow in Moab, this hostile country, trying to raise 2 boys. The 2 boys grow up and they fall in love with 2 Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And they get married, and it seems like a great day, right? Finally some good news for Naomi and for her family. 2 weddings, but these 2 weddings are followed very quickly by 2 funerals. No time for grandkids. As Naomi, after losing her husband, loses both of her sons. And she's just experiencing incredible, incredible grief. Edgar Jackson defines grief like this. He says, "Grief is a silent knife-like terror and sadness that comes 100 times a day when you start to speak to someone who is no longer there. Grief is the emptiness that comes when you eat alone after eating with another for many years. Grief is teaching yourself to go to bed without saying goodnight to the one who has died. Grief is the helpless wishing that things were different when you know they are not and they never will be again." And so some of you, you get it. You know loss, and you know disappointment. Some of you don't, but you will. None of us are exempt from this. If it's not here, it's coming. And Naomi experiences what would seem to be just an inordinate amount of loss, just one thing after another. A few weeks ago, I met with a lady in our church, sweet lady, whose name is Millie, and Millie is a widow in our church who's married for 51 years to her beloved husband. And after he passed, she didn't think that she would find love again, but she did. 5 years later, she was engaged to be married, and then her fiancé passed away just before their wedding day. And she wanted just to talk to me for a bit, and so we sat down at a table here at church, and she reached over and she grabbed my hand and she held onto it and she said, "I know there are other people who feel the way that I feel. I know there are other people who are hurting the way that I'm hurting." And she just expressed what many of you know, that oftentimes you've got friends and well-meaning family and perhaps a church that says, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Yeah, let some time go by. It'll get better." And she just was expressing how lonely that can feel. And so she's written some poetry. And her hope, she said, was just that if there are others who are going through this, that they wouldn't feel alone. They wouldn't know that how they're feeling they wouldn't feel like it's not normal. And so I asked Millie if she could record one of her poems for us. And I think as you listen to this, it gives us a face and it gives us a voice to put with Naomi.
My name is Millie Renner, and I wrote this poem entitled Broken. Do you see that pile of wood chips on the floor? That's what is left of the life I had before, when I was loved by you with all your heart, when passion awoke and played its part. Our oneness in purpose, agreement, and thought is something that could not be bartered or bought. It seemed to be perfect, to have heaven's blessing. Each word, gaze, and touch was a form of caressing. I never had known such love before. Now all that remains is that pile on the floor. It looks to others like I'm doing all right. They don't see the wood chip of crying at night. My family and friends think I'm doing okay. The wood chip is hidden of my struggle each day. So many chips in that pile on the floor. Emptiness, loneliness, disappointment, and more. Dreams unfulfilled, plans hung in mid-air. Love uncompleted beckons imagining so rare. My life has been broken, nothing fits anymore. There's this big pile of wood chips in the middle of my floor.
And that's how Naomi felt. That all that's left is just this pile on the floor of broken pieces. After losing everything, she decides she really doesn't have much choice but to go back home and just hope that things are better in her small town. And so she tells her two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, "Look, you stay here. You're young women. Stay in your homeland of Moab, and you have time to remarry and to have a family, but I have to go back." And Orpah agrees to stay, but Ruth, her daughter-in-law, just refuses to stay. And so Ruth says to her, in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, Ruth says to her mother-in-law Naomi, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." And so here's this daughter-in-law saying this to her mother-in-law. You've probably heard that text before, but you probably heard it at a wedding. Usually that's a scripture that's read as a bride and groom stand in front of each other and express their love and devotion. If we're really going to be accurate with the text, what should happen in the wedding is that the bride should turn away from the groom towards her new mother-in-law and say, "Where you go, I will go." And that's not going to happen. That's a tradition that's not going to catch on, but that's what's happening here. This is just a very special relationship that has formed between a mother-in-law and her daughter-in-law, and the Bible says that when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So Ruth and Naomi make a difficult journey back to Naomi's hometown. They go across the mountains, and her hometown is Bethlehem. And we start to get some indication as to why this story may be in the Bible. Bethlehem is a town of less than 200 people, and so when Naomi returns, it's big news. I mean, people start to talk, and they say, "Is this her? Doesn't look like her. Is this Naomi?" Now remember, her name means pleasant or sweet. They say, is this really Naomi? But man, Naomi says, "Look, don't call me that name anymore, because God has made my life bitter, not sweet." Here's what Naomi says, Ruth chapter 1. She says, "The Almighty has left my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Do you see the expression on her face? She's angry. She is mad at God because he has not held up his end of the deal. This is not the way her story was supposed to go. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. And she says, "Look what God has done to me. He's made my life bitter. The Almighty has brought this misfortune upon me. It's his fault. He's afflicted me." And I wonder if some of this sounds familiar. You just reach this point where it feels like what you had hoped for, what you felt like God was going to deliver, give you, it hasn't worked out. And so you read the story in the book of Ruth of Naomi, and here's the question. Here's the question. What's the story about? What's it really about? You read it and you think, well, this is easy. The story is about loss. It is about a woman who just loses. She loses her home, her land, her husband, her sons. It's a story about loss. And here's the question I would ask. Does the story have to be about loss? Does it have to be about that? She loses a lot, incredible pain and loss. But does it have to be about loss? Is that what the story has to be about? I was listening to a radio interview with a guy named Gerald Sitzer, who is a professor at Whitworth College in Spokane, Washington. And a number of years ago, Gerald, in a car accident, he was hit by a drunk driver, the minivan. He lost 3 generations. He lost his mom, he lost his wife, and he lost his young daughter. But he was not hurt. And in this interview, he just talked about what that was like. And he has a book where he's written about going through the journey, and the book is called A Grace Disguised. I like the title. And here's what he says. He says, quote, "The experience of loss does not need to be the defining moment of our story." Now, it's one thing for me to say that. It's something else when he says it. He says, "The defining moment can be our response to the loss." The story doesn't have to be about the loss. The story could be about our response to the loss. In other words, we don't get to decide what roles we play in the story of our lives, but we get to decide how we play the roles that we're given. And so you reach this point in loss. You reach this point in your story where you just decide, is this going to define me? Is this going to be what my life is about? Is my story just going to be a story of loss? Is that it? Or could the story be about something different? That's hard, and I think it was hard for Naomi not to just get caught up in the pain of the lower story. I mean, we tend to just get focused on what's happening right in front of us, and we see the box, and there's just this disappointment. Naomi says, "Don't call me sweet because I'm bitter. I left full, I've come back empty." But here's what we're going to see, that if there's one word to describe the story of Naomi, the word is not loss. The word is redemption. And so I want us just to listen to the story, but I want us to, just straight from the text, but I want us to listen to how the characters might have expressed what was happening.